Hello, this is Dr. Wolferts from Georgia Integrated Health Center. You're tuning into a special presentation on type 2 diabetes. Now, we don't normally utilize technology, but we get to because the current health landscape doesn't allow us to gather. So before I get into the content of what I prepared about type 2 diabetes, we've put together some patient testimonials that you'll find very valuable.
Hi, I'm Darcy, and I came to Georgia Integrated Health and Dr. Anderson last April. This is now towards the end of October. I came originally because my medical doctor said that my medication that I was on for diabetes was not working any longer and that my next step was insulin. And I said, no way.
My name is William, and I've been going through this since May.
I've been a patient of Integrated Health for about 8 months now. And Integrated Health discovered me at Planet Fitness when I was trying to work through my years of having diabetes and subsequently had other pains like back pain. So I figured if I can go to the gym and work it out, I'll be okay. But lo and behold, I've since learned a lot about my internals, which I couldn't see, the things that was going on in the inside, all the inflammation and the things that was just going on inside that I just did not understand and did not know how to control.
So last November 2018, I was diagnosed with a heart blockage, which was a real kick in the butt because I thought I was perfectly healthy. In April, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So for me, those were two life-threatening events, and I thought, man, what am I going to do? I'd heard about the program here at Georgia Integrated Health Center regarding diabetes reversal and just a better way of living, and decided to investigate. Really liked what I heard and saw.
So I started. My sugar was just uncontrollable. It was high, it was too low. I was taking insulin, I was taking glipizide, but now I haven't taken any glipizide in almost a month. I haven't taken any insulin maybe twice this month, but I'm doing so much better. My numbers, my morning numbers are good, my nighttime numbers are even better. So I'm just really happy with the way I've come out of this situation. So I've learned that if you put your mind to it and you follow the instruction that Dr. Anderson gives you, you'll be like me. You won't be taking any insulin, you won't be taking any pills, you'll just be feeling good, getting along well. So thank you for that, Dr. Anderson.
My body is now going to be getting the right things inside of me as opposed to some of the things I know I was eating, all the junk food and that. I don't know, there's so much I could say, but I don't want to keep going on because I do believe that what Integrated Health is doing is definitely a great thing for people, and I believe that you need to get on board and not let yourself die slowly inside.
Because my mother passed away from diabetes and complications from insulin, and rampant in my family. Both my brothers have it, my father has it, and they're all suffering from the consequences of it. And I decided I didn't want that anymore. So I started off with Dr. Anderson, and I followed everything he told me to do, and I've lost a total of 40 pounds. I'm no longer on any blood pressure medication, and I've cut my metformin to a fourth of what I was taking, and I'm no longer on glipizide.
Wound up being completely off my diabetic medication, big reductions in eliminating some of the heart medicine and then reductions in the dosage on the others. I have lost 45 pounds since the end of May. I'm a retired Marine. I gave a Veterans Day talk at my children's middle school in my Desert Storm combat uniform. So I am really happy and excited about the results of this program and the professionals here at Georgia Integrated Health Center. love this place.
Well, lo and behold, meeting Dr. Anderson and Dr. Wolferts, hey, have been able to put things in perspective for me and have allowed me to manage through my diabetes, going from a 9.1 A1C, and now I'm down to like 6.2, and still working that because I want to get it down to under 5, and I think I'll be able to if I continue to do the things that I'm doing, eating better, exercising better, and doing the things that I know I need to do to internally take care of myself and not just externally.
My goal is to be off medication totally. I'm getting there. Got a little bit longer to go. I don't have the physical pain that I had. I'm not hungry. I'm very satisfied. I haven't had difficulty with the diet at all. It's been a great lifestyle change, and I'm happy. Thank you.
So let's talk about type 2 diabetes. Now, before I do, I want to invite you to invite your spouse, your significant other, that special person, right? The person you think about if I ask you, who takes care of you when you're sick? Who do you send to the grocery store when you're not feeling well? Invite that person to sit down with you right now and to be a part of this conversation. Now, over the years, we've been doing this work, treating hundreds, if not thousands, of patients with chronic diseases. When it comes to type 2 diabetes, what patients have confided in us is that they got diagnosed as a type 2 diabetic on a very routine office visit to their medical doctor. They showed up, maybe it was a work requirement, an insurance requirement, maybe they had a cough, they weren't feeling well, an allergy or something. They just go to just get something checked out, they have some lab work done, and they get invited back to go over the results. And the doctor comes in, he or she, and looks and says, you know, these blood sugar numbers aren't good, you know, this A1C number isn't good. It looks like you've developed type 2 diabetes. And it's like in that moment, before that's even had a chance to really land on the patient, for the patient to even process that, the doctor's already clicking the pen, writing out the prescription. Here you go, here's your first prescription medication. For a disease that most patients have shared they didn't even know or realize they were developing. Now, I did have one gentleman come in once, said that the only symptom that he ever had that he was developing diabetes or had diabetes was he suddenly went blind one day while he was driving on the interstate. Now, by some miracle, he was able to get his car over to the side of the road and get some help, flagging someone down to call an ambulance. They took him into the emergency room, they ran some blood. His blood sugars were over 800. Now, he had no idea. There was no symptom that he felt at that time that told him, you have a problem with your blood sugars. He just went blind. Now, that's a very extreme example. Most patients don't know up until the point that they're diagnosed that they're even becoming a diabetic. Maybe it runs in their family, so they maybe had some suspicions, but a lot of times there's nothing obvious that they know of. They may be having symptoms of some kind. Maybe they're having headaches, maybe sleep isn't as great, but things that they wouldn't typically associate with diabetes, things we'll talk about in a little bit here as we go forward. But they didn't know they were becoming diabetic, and all of a sudden, now they have to take a medication. All of a sudden, now they have to prick their finger every day. All of a sudden, now they have to start meeting up, with regular visits to their doctor to see how is this progressing. How am I doing? And so they begin this journey that is fraught with advice, lots of advice on dieting, right? Diabetic dieting, diabetic weight loss, right? Diabetic exercise. 1,000 different, choices out there, 1,000 different opinions, 1,000 different ideas on what you need to be doing. You got to count this, you got to cut that, you got to weigh this, you got to measure that. And it's very, very confusing. But a lot of patients take it on themselves, like, well, I got to do something. So they make changes. Maybe I should eat more fruits and vegetables, right? Maybe I should try fasting. Maybe I should, cut out soda, or maybe cut out coffee, or they just trying anything, right? And what happens over time is they go back and they're going for their routine follow-up visits, and inevitably the doctor says, well, your blood sugars are still not doing that great. Your A1C seems to be climbing again, and so we have to increase the dosage of medication. We have to maybe introduce a new oral medication, something like glipizide or glyburide, things of that nature. The whole point being you have an insulin-resistant problem, all right? Your body is no longer responding to the insulin it's producing. You're becoming what's called insulin resistant. And all these medications are designed to really drive up the amount of insulin available in your body. Now, here's the problem with that, and we'll touch on this in more detail in a little bit, is the more exposure your body has to insulin, the more resistant it will become to it over time, all right? So these medications that are designed to actually increase the amount of insulin available in the body may actually be driving the very disease process that they're trying to get rid of, that they're trying to manage, right? So patients start to realize over time, man, every time I show up to the doctor's office, I'm being prescribed something new. It's like I can't ever get this diabetic thing figured out. I was on one medication for diabetes, now I'm on 2 or 3, and oh, by the way, your blood pressure's up, your cholesterol numbers aren't good, right? So then there's another medication, and then another one, and 5, 6, 7, 8 medications later, patients begin to wonder, well, what am I taking for what? Is this medications to offset the side effects of this one? Like, why am I on these things? I once had a patient share with me that her doctor sat down with her and said, you need to start taking a blood pressure medication. She said, doctor, do I have a blood pressure problem? And the doctor said, no, but it's the standard of care. It's required in order for you to be treated by us and to continue to have some insurance coverage for it, you have to start taking blood pressure medications, even though she had no blood pressure problems at that point. You see, what the doctor was forecasting for her is blood pressure very frequently becomes a problem over time with diabetes. So in their mind, it made sense to, reasonably, well, let's get you started on this to prevent blood pressure from becoming a problem. Eventually, patients get frustrated and tired. At least they share with us that, they feel like it's just one drug after the next. So they turn to their next alternative source of information. That's Dr. Google or his assistant, right, nurse, Facebook. And they begin to look at, well, what are other people doing out there? And they start to see all these different diabetic solutions, the starvation diets, the lemon and maple syrup diets, the South Beach diet, the North Beach diet, right? This exercise program, right? And it seems like everybody out there has something different they've tried. They've known someone who did something that ultimately, helped their blood sugars. And they're left trying to figure all of this out on their own. And as time goes on and the blood sugars seem to still be just all over the place. I ate fruits and vegetables, on this one day, and the next day my blood sugars were as high as they've ever been. Or I started exercising and I was losing weight, but my blood sugars never came down. I don't feel any better. As a matter of fact, I'm more tired now than I've been. My mood is really starting to sour. I'm not a depressed kind of person, but I'm starting to feel like maybe I'm getting depressed. And I know if I share these things with my doctor, it's just going to be another medication. So, so what do I do? Well, you do the best you can. And you go back to your doctor, and the doctor says, look, the blood sugars really aren't well. We can't really prescribe any more of these oral medications. So really the last resort we have, and they may not even use that terminology, but the last resort is insulin. They got to actually put you on insulin. Now, let's rewind that for a second, because we talked about this is an insulin-resistant disease, and more exposure to insulin actually makes the resistance higher. So the last resort is to put patients on insulin? What a lot of patients are sharing when they share this story with us is the overall sense of they don't feel like they're really getting any answers to why they became a diabetic. What caused them to be sick to begin with? What do they really need to do for themselves to actually get well? A lot of patients are also very oblivious to the complications that will happen if they don't take care of this problem. Maybe some are because they've seen what family members have gone through. They've seen an uncle or an aunt or a family member go through the long-term complications of diabetes. But a lot of diabetics that I talk to are honestly unaware what happens. So let's talk about the complications for a moment, because as diabetes continues to progress, which it does when all you're doing is treating the symptoms, right? things underneath, multiple organ systems underneath the surface become involved. This is a much bigger picture than just a blood sugar problem. Diabetes is a multi-system, multi-organ disease process. Creates a lot of dysfunction throughout the body. Take, for example, your blood vessels. Diabetics very frequently run into blood issues, right? Blood vessel problems. What happens over time is the blood vessels become unhealthy. They become unable to thoroughly and adequately repair themselves. They begin to die off. And as they do, the tissues that they're supplying with oxygen and blood begin to suffer as well. And one of the first that we see typically is the nervous system begins to suffer. So in the arms, down into the hands, or down the legs and into the feet, patients develop neuropathy, right? The blood vessels that are no longer supplying the nerves with good oxygen, good blood supply, those nerves begin to malfunction. They start to develop the numbness and the tingling, and eventually they begin to die. Now, because they're also responsible for keeping the tissues in the hands and the feet alive, that leads to amputation over time. All right, if the nervous system, the nerves that are dying, the nerves that are developing that neuropathy are in the eyes, what we call retinopathy, well, then that leads to blindness. This also disrupts your body's natural blood pressure molecules, nitric oxide, for example. So blood pressure becomes a problem. In men, this affects blood flow to the sex organs, so erectile dysfunction runs rampant among male diabetics. If this is the blood supply up into the brain, then that increases your likelihood of having a stroke. The stress of these changes in the blood, of blood pressure changes, of blood chemistry changes over time begin to damage the kidneys. And so a patient then, if they haven't had an amputation or heart attack or stroke of some kind, may end up on kidney dialysis. And so, as I share this, some of you out there may be thinking, well, I don't have any symptoms. I was just recently diagnosed. Look, I'm here to tell you, do not sleep on this disease. This disease just continues. It's called the silent killer for a reason. It ultimately ends in a premature death. Now, the reason that this problem exists to the level that it does here in America, in spite of the fact that we've got the technology we have the diagnostic tools available, we have facilities pretty much everywhere. We have emergency services, right? You really can't go anywhere without an ambulance somewhere close by to pick you up. The reason why people are continuing to get sick and that this disease continues to disrupt lives and ruin lives ultimately is because our healthcare system would probably be more adequately named a sick care system. I think we can all agree that our system of healthcare is really designed to be very reactive. It waits till there's a problem. And don't get me wrong, when it comes to emergencies, we have the best that's available to us, right? Broken bones, right? Wounds, right? Car accidents, things of that nature. We have technology that will keep a person alive long enough for their body to recover so they can continue living. But when it comes to chronic ongoing disease, we aren't doing very well. Where we rank in the world as far as long-term healthcare, we're not number one. We're way down the list. As a matter of fact, Cuba ranks higher than us on the list of health outcomes. And some studies were done to find out, well, how is it that a country like Cuba that doesn't have the economy we have, that's actually considered to be like 60 years in the past, how is it that they have better health outcomes? And what was found is that because they don't have a very strong economy, most of the country is very poor, they actually have to take proactive measures to protect their health. They can't afford to have all the medications and all the surgeries and all the issues that develop as a result of having long-term chronic disease. So they're actually taking better steps to actually protect health. We in our country are not as good at that. By the time you get a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, you're so used to going into a doctor's office and receiving a medication. Think about all the headaches you've ever had. You may not even go to a doctor anymore for those things. You just go to the pharmacy or the pharmacy section and pick up an over-the-counter drug. Every time you have a tummy ache, right? Every time you have a sniffle. everything that relates to health has been so heavily treated to get rid of the symptoms, to suppress the symptoms, that by the time you have a major diagnosis, we're all just so entrenched in that system of, well, what's the next medication? What should I take? So if you're sick of dealing with this disease and it being managed the way it is, of suppressing a symptom every time, and more medications, if you're looking for a different outcome, if you're looking to actually get a hold of your health and begin to even reverse this diabetic process, you're going to need different information. You're going to need the right information. Now, I'm going to talk about what that right information is. You see, when it comes to understanding diabetes, you have to understand that there are root causes. There's a reason why a person becomes diabetic. There's a reason why the many organs in the body that become involved, that become insulin resistant, that become damaged, there's a reason why that is kicked off to begin with, right? Something sparked that to begin with. Where it ended was you got a diagnosis, right? You were told you have a blood sugar problem. But very few, if any, and in the time I've been doing this work, I've never seen a patient come in who already had an understanding as to why they were diabetic, right? They may have been told it's because you're overweight. They may have been told it's because you have a lousy lifestyle. They may have been told, it's genetic, right? All those types of things. But not knowing the real reason why they're type 2 diabetic has continued them along a path and a journey that doesn't seem to get them anywhere, that they're just spinning their wheels and getting frustrated. So the right information begins with understanding that there is a root cause to this disease. There is a reason why you've become diabetic. Now, there are multiple organs that are involved in developing insulin resistance. So let's talk about insulin resistance and what that means. Over time, the more repeatedly your body is exposed to something, the more immune, you've probably heard that term before, the more immune it becomes to that. If you live in a house that's by train tracks, the first couple months that you lived in the house, you probably heard the train go by every day. But over time, you become immune to that sound and you may not even hear it anymore. When you first start taking a medication, for example, it probably has a very strong effect. But as you take it more long term, its effect goes down because the body learns to adapt to it and becomes more resistant to it. The same thing can happen with the body's own chemistry. The more insulin that your body produces, the more it has the potential to become resistant to that insulin. And so over time, if things aren't done to understand and balance blood sugars on a fundamental level, and you just rely solely on that insulin to do the job, your body's going to become insulin resistant and sugars start to go up. Well, what organs are then involved in this problem of developing insulin resistance? What's allowing these sugars to go so high that you have to keep creating tons and tons of insulin to deal with it, creating that long-term exposure? Well, a lot of patients are first taught to think about the pancreas, and that may be the only organ they're taught to deal with because that's the one that produces insulin. But there are a lot of different organs that are involved in balancing blood sugars. Now, the pancreas is important, but in the years I've been doing this work, I have yet to see really any patients who come in who actually have a pancreas that's at fault for developing insulin resistance. Most of the patients we've treated over the years rarely have ever have a problem with the pancreas. There's a lot of other organs involved that very frequently aren't tested, aren't considered, aren't regarded, that have a lot to do with blood sugar handling. Take the liver, for example. Very, very common for patients, for diabetics long-term, to develop liver problems. Now, the liver is actually responsible for, among many things, releasing sugar at a steady rate throughout the day and throughout the night, so that way you don't lose blood sugar, so that way it doesn't drop too low, because you become hypoglycemic at that point. You can pass out, become dizzy, become faint, things of that nature. You would die in your sleep because we're fasting essentially for 8 hours, not eating anything, if the liver wasn't storing sugar and releasing it. Now, because it's a container, if you will, full of sugar, if that organ is not functioning properly, that can also lead to a spillover of a lot of sugar into the bloodstream, causing changes and fluctuations in blood sugar. Insulin has a very significant impact on the liver in that the more insulin that's in the system, the more it actually causes the liver to have to store sugar. So long term, as it continues to store more and more sugar, that becomes very damaging. That becomes actually toxic to the liver. And so the liver will actually undergo a change and start to develop fat. And that's where that fatty liver comes in. And that becomes a long-term storage solution for this ongoing insulin-resistant problem and ongoing sugar problem. But as a liver becomes fatty, it loses its ability to detoxify your body. And so you actually become sicker over time. And so diabetics with long-term fatty liver issues that many of them weren't aware they were developing until they got a diagnosis of fatty liver, end up getting put on a transplant list, right? You gotta have someone donate a liver to you. The thing is when you get to the root causes of diabetes and you start to figure this out, what you can do is actually halt that progression, halt that development of fatty liver. And the liver is a very remarkable organ in that it has this tremendous capacity to restore a lot of its function if the environment changes, if the body's healing capacity increases or improves. If you remove the causes of dysfunction and disease, it can restore and regenerate a lot of its function and keep a person healthy and help keep blood sugars regulated throughout that person's life. Another organ that we very frequently see a lot of dysfunction with and very rarely see anyone actually having been tested for are the adrenal glands. Now, the adrenal glands sit right on top of the kidneys, and they serve a multitude of functions, some of which include your sleep-wake cycles, right? So being able to wake up in the morning, with energy, being able to go to bed at night, not having your mind, racing and your heart racing, but being able to actually just calm down and go to sleep and stay asleep through the night. That's part of that is that function is the adrenal glands, what we call the circadian rhythms. They also influence blood sugar levels. There's a whole slew of hormones that come out of the adrenal glands that deal with blood chemistry. And so they have a lot to do with your blood sugar levels. Stress. This is actually where your stress hormones are manufactured and produced. Now, a lot of us are dealing with stress on a very regular basis. As a matter of fact, I think all of us are, right? Our capacity to deal with stress is different for every individual, right? So you may have, a cup worth, the capacity to deal with stress. I might have a pitcher. Someone else may have, a bathtub, right? Some of you might have a thimble, right? The amount of stress that you can handle, it varies from individual to individual. And we all start out with some level of stress, right? The air we breathe, just the toxins that are in the air, the pollution that's around us, right? Our family situations, our work situations, right? There's a certain level of stress that we're always dealing with. But as you start to pile on, stress of what's happening, with the health in the world right now with pandemics and things, you start to pour more stress into that container. If you're furloughed or laid off from your job, you start to add more stress into there. And as that stress begins to build, eventually it starts to run over. And when you have diabetes and the development of diabetes, that continues to raise the amount of stress that you're already dealing with. So when a pandemic comes along and you're put into a high-risk category because your body cannot deal with this next added thing because it causes it to run over, right? That's the job of the adrenal glands. And very frequently, diabetes is very, very taxing on the adrenal glands and can cause a person's stress levels to skyrocket and to not be able to deal with it. And for a lot of patients to kind of, if you will, just feel like they want to shut down. They want to close the curtains and just don't want to engage in life anymore. They're worn out. They just feel fatigued. They feel like motivation is just sapped because of the destructive nature of diabetes on the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands also have direct ties to our fertility, our sexuality. Females who have irregular cycles, symptoms of PCOS, males who have erectile dysfunction disorders, right? Low testosterone. That stuff is all handled from the adrenal glands. And so when diabetes continues to persist and the adrenal glands become faulty, again, we see patients have terrible sleep-wake cycles. Their sex life is ruined. Their stress seems to be out of control. Everything seems to just affect them way more than it should. And on top of it, the effect that these things have on blood sugars is tremendous, right? When cortisol, right, you may have heard of cortisol, gets released from your adrenal glands to cope and deal with stress, two of its functions are to raise blood sugar and to suppress the immune system. So if you have cortisol levels that are constantly running high, that actually sets you up for when you get exposed to a virus or bacteria to have an immune system that is already suppressed and not able to protect you as well. So getting the adrenal glands to be healthy again can actually reduce those risks, can actually take you out of that high risk category and allow you to be healthier. A lot of the things that we see through our office as patients are really working and trying to take control of their health is we find that what they're eating is often a disaster. Now, I'm not talking about the donuts and the sodas and things that many of you know you shouldn't be eating. We're talking about things called food sensitivities. Now, a lot of people are aware of food allergies. You may have heard of food allergies before, right? Those are the anaphylactic reactions when you hear someone ate peanuts and their throat closed up, they couldn't breathe, they had to get an epinephrine type of injection. What I'm talking about is a more subtle, kind of more sinister, if you will, reaction to food that you're eating, right? I think many of you probably already struggle with the question, well, what should I eat to begin with? I seem to eat this and it's like my blood sugars go crazy. I seem to eat this and they do fine, but then they eat it again, they go crazy. And I'm trying to eat the right things, but it doesn't seem to be helping me at all. I've switched to organic. As a matter of fact, I had a female come in not too long ago who said she switched to an all organic diet, right? Doesn't buy anything prepackaged, right? Shops the perimeter of the store, as you've heard. Won't do anything that has like tons of added ingredients. Was working out 5 days a week at the gym. She told me 2 hours every day, and yet she was heavier than she'd ever been in her life. Her joints were constantly swollen, right? She could not seem to get control of what was happening, even though she had changed to what every magazine had ever told her about being healthy. Well, we ran a food sensitivity test on her and found out that spinach, right? Spinach in her diet was actually causing her to have a reaction. Now, that's not a reaction that would happen immediately. She would eat spinach one day and the next day her body was reacting to it, causing inflammation. But she had no idea it was the spinach. It was also the almond milk she was drinking. She was having food reactions to almonds. We had another gentleman who had made changes as well because he was told, well, for the blood pressure problems and inflammation, he should be doing turmeric. And he should also be switching out all of his sugars and things for cinnamon. Well, those two things came back positive. Those were actually causing his body to be more inflamed, causing his body to actually develop more insulin resistance. So there's a lot more to this story than just, hey, just change your lifestyle, just fix your diet. Because what are you going to fix it to? If what you're eating is causing inflammation and you don't know that, if what you're eating is causing a change in insulin sensitivity and you don't know that, a lot of times patients and people out there can be eating their way healthily, if you will, into further health problems. So understanding that, and we will talk about the immune system in a moment here, that there are things that the body tolerates well and there are things that it doesn't tolerate well, and that's different for each person. That can make a difference right out the gate of understanding, wow, like, how do I really take care of myself as an individual dealing with a long-term disease like diabetes? So let's talk about the immune system because it's getting a lot of attention in the news. People who have compromised immune systems, people who are at risk, these high-risk people, it's because the immune system is not protecting you the way that it should, right? The immune system is your defense mechanism. The long-term effect of the immune system being constantly suppressed, constantly challenged, and being taken out of balance is that it can develop into what we call an autoimmune situation where it's now attacking the body instead of defending it. This moves patients into a category of what we call type 1.5 diabetes. So it's not type 1, it's not type 2, it sits right in the middle. And when a patient has type 1.5, they may not have the typical symptoms when we tend to think of a type 2 diabetic. They're not typically overweight. A lot of times they have other autoimmune types of conditions, thyroid conditions, for example, develop, which can cause changes in energy, changes in mood. They may have things like eczema, skin conditions. Their joints may be achy more, they hurt a lot more. That immune system can actually develop antibodies against things like insulin. And so we have patients who come in and they're taking insulin and they're like, my blood sugars go up when I take insulin. I feel worse when I take insulin. And come to find out, every time they inject the insulin, it's actually triggering the immune system to have a response, to create inflammation, which actually drives then autoimmune conditions even further, causes it to turn even more on the body. I recently met with a woman who was seeking to be admitted into our practice, and I looked at her blood work that we had run, and not only were her insulin levels through the roof, they were like 10 times higher what they should be, she had insulin antibodies that were through the roof. So her immune system was actually attacking the insulin that her body was producing and the insulin that she was injecting into herself. Now that creates a whole nother issue, because every time she injected insulin, not only was it promoting insulin resistance, but it was actually stimulating the immune system to become more irritated, more reactive to the insulin itself. The only way that she was going to be helped is to figure out first and foremost what is causing all this mess to begin with, and to start to get her then off the insulin so her body can actually calm down that response, become more sensitive to insulin where it needs to be, and less sensitive to insulin on the immune system side. And that takes a lot of understanding and work to really be able to dig in and understand, what is that process? What's causing that? What's the mechanism that's causing that to happen? It's also, though, what allows us to help patients go from being full-blown diabetic to being non-diabetic. For A1C numbers to be 7, 8, 9, we've had patients in the double digits, 10, 11, 12 on their A1C, and over the course of sometimes even as little as 2 months, those numbers come down. We start to see them dropping down. We have a woman just recently came in, totally diabetic, A1C running right about 7. After completing care with us, her A1C was at 5.0. We had another gentleman, Gerald, who his blood sugars got up around 10 at one point. They were talking about putting him on insulin when he heard about what we do. And he said, you know what? I got to do something different. Like, insulin's the last straw, and I don't want to do that. So he came seeking to be admitted as a patient, and through the course of treatment, he was able to get his blood sugar down to 5.3. He shared with me that actually his endocrinologist that he was seeing through all those years called him up and said she had to release him as a patient. She couldn't treat him anymore. And he asked her why, and she said, well, I got a copy of the blood work, and you're not a diabetic anymore. And well, I only treat diabetics. And so that's what we see as possible when you start to figure out what is the root cause of this disease. Reclaiming your health and reversing a disease process like type 2 diabetes is possible when you have a team around you that is willing to support you, that has the right information, right? Has figured out why you're sick to begin with, and is able to put in place the type of plan that you can follow, that you're accountable to, in order to be successful. We rarely, if ever, see our patients fail at this process of reversing type 2 diabetes. And when I say reversing type 2 diabetes, let me be very clear on that. We're talking about reducing the symptoms and complications of this disease, while at the same time being able to reduce the need for prescription medications, increasing the amount of energy a person enjoys, a person's sex life being restored, being able to sleep well. I want to touch on sleep for a moment, because I mentioned that the adrenal glands have a lot to do with our sleep-wake cycles. As a matter of fact, we now know that disruption in your circadian rhythms is the first sign of dementia. And so Alzheimer's and the explosion we're seeing there in the number of diagnoses, there's actually a blood sugar cause to that, what's called glycotoxicity. It's why diabetes in these cases that are causing this development in dementia is being called type 3 diabetes. But being able to reduce the risks of that type of diagnosis being able to restore proper sleep-wake cycles, restore proper function. That's what's possible when you get to the root cause of the issue. If you want the opportunity to take yourself out of the high-risk category, if you're tired of the one drug after another approach with no end in sight, if you're tired of dieting and exercising with little or no results, right? You're forced to now have your health as your number one priority. Then we want to give you the opportunity to meet, to see if you can be accepted as a patient, to see if you qualify for what we do. In order to secure a spot, it's $59. And I do require that your spouse, that person we talked about at the beginning, they must be present, whether that's through technology or whether that's here in person. And by the way, we do take the social distancing seriously at our office. We have deeply sanitized our office, so if you would like to come in, we have that opportunity available. But again, your spouse must be present with you, okay? Be good to yourselves, be good to each other, stay safe out there, stay sane out there. I look forward to meeting you soon at the office. Take care.